Kenneth William Ken Bates is a British businessman, football executive and hotelier. He was involved in forming the Premier League, the development of Wembley Stadium, and is the former owner and chairman of Chelsea F.C. and Leeds United AFC. He spent 5 years as chairman of Oldham Athletic during the 1960s and also had a spell at Wigan Athletic. In 1982, Bates bought Chelsea for £1. During his tenure he helped the club win a long-running battle with property developers who were attempting to evict them from the Stamford Bridge home. By the end of his reign, Chelsea were regularly finishing in the top 6 of the Premier League, and had won the first major trophies since the 1970s, although they had a debt burden of around £80 million. In July 2003, he sold the club to Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich, from whom he received £140 million. In January 2005, Bates bought a 50% stake in Leeds United, another club struggling under a heavy debt burden. In May 2007, Leeds entered administration and were relegated to League One. The club regained championship status in 2010, and, in May 2011, it was confirmed that Bates had become the sole owner. In November 2012, Bates sold his holdings in Leeds United to GFH Capital. Biography. Early life. Bates was born in Ealing in 1931. His mother died shortly afterwards and his father absconded, so he was raised by his grandparents in a council flat. He grew up supporting Queen's Park Rangers but was unsuccessful in pursuing a playing career in football. He made his personal fortune in the haulage industry and later moved into quarrying, ready-mix concrete and dairy farming. He was involved with various other enterprises during the 1960s and 1970s, including projects on the British Virgin Islands and in Rhodesia. The Leeds United fanzine Square Ball has published a photograph of Ken Bates with Rhodesian PM Ian Smith during a 1967 tour by Oldham Athletic, when Rhodesia was subject to UN sanctions. Square Ball has reported, having worked with a documentary made in the British Virgin Islands, that Bates attempted to purchase the island of Tortola on a 199-year lease, but was thwarted after protests by islanders caused the local government to change its decision, and investigations began by the British government. The original agreement to lease the island was known as the Bates Hill Agreement. Today, a park on Tortola is named after Noel Lloyd, a resident of the island who led the opposition to the agreement. In 1976, he set up the Irish Trust Bank, but it was eventually wound up leaving thousands of investors out of pocket. Oldham and Wigan. After having been chairman of Oldham Athletic for 5 years in the 1960s, in 1980 Bates became co-owner and vice-chairman of Wigan Athletic with his old business associate F.C.and. He provided significant finance by way of bank guarantees that enabled the then-manager, Larry Lloyd, to sign a number of players, not the least of which was Eamon O'Keefe from Everton for £65,000. The Latics duly gained promotion under Lloyd to the 3rd Division in May 1982. Chelsea F.C. Later in 1982, Bates purchased Chelsea for £1. When he purchased the club, they were in serious financial trouble, as well as being tarnished by a notorious hooligan element among the support. They were also struggling in the Football League's 2nd Division, a stark contrast to the successful era from 1955 to 1971, when they had won a Football League 1st Division title, an FA Cup, Football League Cup and European Cup Winners' Cup. After narrowly escaping relegation to the 3rd Division in the 1982-83 season, Bates made the funds available to manager John Neal to sign players such as Kerry Dixon, David Speedy, Pat Nevin, Mickey Thomas, Eddie Needswicky and Nigel Spackman, who helped the the club win promotion and re-established themselves in the top flight with consecutive top six finishes. Chelsea have spent all but one season in the top flight of English football since 1984, and by the time Bates stepped down as chairman in 2003, they were firmly re-established as one of English football's leading sides, having achieved 7 successive top six finishes in the FA Premier League and won several major trophies, as well as signing a succession of high-profile players, including many foreign international stars. In the early years, he fought a successful and long-running legal battle with property developers, Marlow Estates, who had purchased a substantial portion of the freehold of Stamford Bridge, Chelsea's home ground. He reunited the freehold with the club after Marlow's bankruptcy following a market crash, which allowed him to do a deal with the banks and create the Chelsea Pitch Owners, an organization set up to stave off future developers and attempted to make the club more financially viable. He also had Stamford Bridge rebuilt as an all-seater stadium by 1995, and by 2001 it had a capacity of more than 42,000. In the mid-1980s, he famously erected an electric perimeter fence around the pitch at Stamford Bridge to prevent pitch invasions, but the fence was soon dismantled after the local council refused him permission to turn the electricity on. Bates spent 21 years at Chelsea, during which time he attracted the headlines on many occasions and employed no fewer than 9 managers. His matchday program notes, in which he often attacked various individuals, were also controversial. In 2002, he was sued for libel by Chelsea supporter David Johnston after describing fans group, the Chelsea Independent Supporters Association, as parasites. Bates eventually settled out of court. During the 1990s, he was involved in a bitter dispute with Chelsea benefactor and vice-chairman Matthew Harding over the club's future direction, which led to Harding being banned from the Chelsea boardroom. The dispute was ultimately only ended by Harding's death in a helicopter crash in October 1996. Bates sparked further controversy the following year, when he said of Harding, "I don't believe evil should triumph, and he was an evil man. This is a much happier ship at Chelsea now he's no longer around." By the end of his chairmanship, Stamford Bridge had been substantially refurbished and modernized. While he had become Chelsea's most successful chairman, the club had won several major trophies and were consistently finishing in the top 6 of the Premiership, even finishing third and just 4 points behind champions Manchester United in 1999, as well as qualifying for the Champions League with a top-class playing squad containing the likes of Gianfranco Zola, Roberto Di Matteo, Graham Lasso, Marcel Desailly and Jimmy Floyd Hasselback. However, its future was threatened by an estimated debt burden of £80 million, yet it was secured against the club's ground, Stamford Bridge. In 2003, he sold the club to Russian oil billionaire Roman Abramovich for a sum of £140 million, making a £17 million profit. Bruce Buck, the current chairman, was in charge of the club's sale to Roman Abramovich. After the takeover, Bates was investigated by the FSA for allegedly owning undeclared shares in Chelsea Village plc, but the case was eventually dropped. He stayed on as club chairman until March 2004, when he announced his resignation. Within a couple of weeks of his departure, he was back in the limelight as he wrote a one-off column in the Bolton Wanderers matchday program, incidentally and somewhat ironically against Chelsea, FA and Wembley Stadium. Bates was an active member of the Football Association executive and was involved in the early stages of the project to rebuild Wembley Stadium, and was appointed chairman of Wembley National Stadium Limited in 1997. He resigned in 2001, citing a lack of support from the board. Irked at the lack of progress, he later suggested that the best way to move the project forward was to shoot then-Minister for Sport Kenneth Leeds United AFC in January 2005. After failing in a bid to invest in Sheffield Wednesday, Bates became the principal owner and chairman of then-struggling Championship team Leeds United, purchasing 50% of the club. He was quoted as saying that he wanted one last challenge. Bates had a dispute with former club Chelsea, having accused them of tapping up 3 Leeds youth players, accusations denied by Chelsea. Chelsea in turn reported Bates to the FA for his comment that the current Chelsea directors are a bunch of shysters from Siberia, an alleged anti-Semitic remark about Abramovich, something denied by Bates. Upon hearing that Chelsea had reported him, Bates said, "I haven't laughed so much since Ma caught her tits in the mangle." The FA also agreed with Bates, stating that he had no case to answer. His own club Leeds have themselves come under scrutiny after non-league team Farsley Celtic accused Leeds of improperly signing youngsters from them. The case brought against Chelsea was eventually dropped after the two clubs agreed to a settlement privately. Bates planned to eventually repurchase Leeds' home stadium, Elland Road, and the Thorpe Arch training ground. However, he failed to achieve either of these objectives during the 8-year period of his ownership of the club. In May 2007, Leeds went into administration and suffered relegation to the third tier of English football. Soon afterwards, it was announced that KPMG, acting as the administrator, had agreed to sell the club to a newly formed company called Leeds United Football Club Limited, of which Bates is one of 3 directors. The consortium, led by Bates, bought the club back from the administrators, via offshore companies, for £1.5 million. After the administration, the club was considered to be debt-free. Bates became unpopular with groups of fans, and during the summer protests were held at games, demanding that the chairman should resign. In May 2011, in anticipation of promotion to the English Premier League, Bates confirmed, according to the BBC, that he had become the sole owner of Leeds United. During Bates' time as chairman at Leeds United, he has worked with 5 managers. Kevin Blackwell was the manager when Bates joined Leeds and was sacked after playoff final failure and a disappointing league position during the following season. Dennis Wise was then hired to replace Kevin Blackwell, but after being the man in charge of Leeds being relegated to League One, Wise decided to join Newcastle United in a non-managerial role despite Leeds' good start to the season. Gary McAllister was the man appointed to replace Wise. McAllister was able to guide Leeds to the League One playoff final, but a 1-0 loss to Doncaster saw Leeds banished to League One for yet another year. In the 2008-09 season, Leeds were one of the pre-season favourites to promotion, and after a good start the form faltered dramatically, and after a run of 5 straight defeats, Bates decided to sack McAllister. On the 23rd of December, Leeds United hired Simon Grayson as the new manager. On the 1st of February 2012, Bates relieved Simon Grayson of his managerial duties, citing a string of defeats, a disappointment in Grayson suggesting that he was under financial constraints, and need for a new voice and direction. Neil Redfern was installed as caretaker manager until Neil Warnock was appointed as permanent manager on the 18th of February 2012. On the 21st of November 2012, Bates finalized a deal to sell Leeds to Middle East-based private equity group GFH Capital, with them gaining 100% shareholding in the club. It was announced Bates would remain as chairman until the end of the 2012-13 season and then become the club president. The takeover, a cash deal worth £52 million, was officially completed on 21 December 2012. On 1 July 2013, Bates officially stepped down as chairman and moved to the position of honorary president. He was replaced in the role of chairman by Sir Alan Noruddin. His tenure as president was short-lived, however. He was sacked on 26 July 2013, apparently due to a dispute over payment for his private jet. Personal life. Being married 3 times, he currently resides in Monaco with his present wife, Susanna. He has 5 children.